Hey, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 162 with Brian Kibby, CEO of Modern Campus. So if you're like me, then you've noticed they've been making a lot of moves and waves in the higher ed tech space, making some acquisitions, and they're just doing great work. And Brian brings a lot of enthusiasm and optimism for this space and provides some commentary on the latest trends and headlines of mergers and acquisitions between colleges and universities, and just the opportunities that are out there, the tailwinds, and the investments that should be made to benefit the student experience. So it was a very refreshing conversation. Just really appreciate Brian's energy and all that he shared. You connect with him and everything that he mentioned in the show notes. But also housekeeping stuff. Make sure, please, if you haven't already, please fill out our listener survey. It's been super helpful to see folks filling that out and what they've been kind of informing me about to better shape next year's season and other collaborations and things that we do in the future. Also, check out the merch store, great way to support the show. And with all of that, without further ado, this is episode number 162, a bonus episode with Brian Kibby. Alrighty, we are here to continue conversations with folks about kind of the big trends and major forces moving higher ed right now. So we're keeping a broad focus on this one. I'm very excited to just kind of hear what's on our guest's mind. So we will just get into it here and start out as we always do. Brian, if you want to introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your professional background and how you got to be where you are today.
Hey, Dustin, thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to be here. Let's have some fun. I've been in post-secondary education my entire career. Most of my career was spent at two of the major education platform companies, Pearson and McGraw-Hill, where I was head of sales for Pearson, and also at McGraw-Hill, president of their higher education group. Some detours along the way with Newton, and I ran a large transportation company for a couple of years. Other than that, post-secondary education has been my life and my love. I'm a product of the community college system. I'm also a veteran. I joined the Army at 17, went to community college at night while I was in the service, and then I went to state school at USA. I would like to say that the community college system in the United States is the best in the world, and for people like me, it represents just an incredible second chance at, in many ways, life, but also professional life. So incredible value for dollar, and I'm sure we'll touch on the community college system here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because I think it is, I just see headlines about community college keep coming up. So I think there's folks out there, I'm sure you're one of them, kind of just strong advocates for the value of the community college experience. And, they do educate so many people. So I think their relevance, their value, their importance, and, they're ones that are also kind of leading the way a lot with, so the free college, sort of movement or kind of trend, as it were. So, yeah, I mean, that's a sort of a bigger picture here. So I know you are currently at Modern Campus. So they're definitely big players right now in the higher ed ecosystem, a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, if we've had a guest on before for that was from Modern Campus. So we'll definitely cite back to that episode. But if you want to just explain a bit really quickly what Modern Campus does, just so folks have that context.
Sure. When we look at the higher education landscape today and the forces that are impacting higher education, there are 4 million or more fewer students today than there were 13 years ago. Enrollments have dropped 13 years, if I'm not mistaken, straight. Many college universities outside of the elites, and there's probably only about 100 elites in the United States. Everyone else has got to just figure it out. So when you have all these different forces, when you have the students, many students now questioning traditional higher education and going right into the workforce, but they're not questioning the need to upskill and the need for some form of post-secondary education. So when we look at many of those forces and other forces, what we've done with Modern Campus is we put together a platform that first works with our partners to help make them more competitive, because we all know that the 5,000 college universities in the United States and Canada in particular, they have a competitiveness issue that we'll discuss here today. So the part of the platform we built is to help them become more competitive, attract more students, help to make those students even more successful at their chosen institution, help to make them deeply engaged, and then ultimately more active alumni in the end. So our platform helps to build that. Then our platform is also really about how do we work with our partner universities to take the modern learner from learner to earner for life. And so we built that platform for those two primary reasons.
Yeah, and I feel like I just kind of keeping an eye on everything that's happening and seeing, which I feel like we keep teasing a lot of I think what we're talking about today of like kind of mergers, acquisitions, among colleges themselves. But you've been kind of playing in the space right now as well. So I think I'll sort of lead into that though with like, you're speaking to kind of uh, these current trends in higher ed right now. There's a lot of sort of I think both kind of headwinds and tailwinds and just sort of disruptions and uh, whatever kind of other synonyms we could use just for sort of, we're entering in a very kind of ambiguous and unpredictable time for higher ed where there's definitely a lot of scrutiny and just a lot of things like that. And like you said, you're working hard with your team to help institutions be more competitive. So, the things that these institutions are trying to be more competitive on, like you mentioned that, but I think digging a little bit deeper right now, like what are you observing as some of the current trends in higher ed right now that are making it harder for institutions to be competitive with, enrollment management, retention, and all those sort of things?
Sure. I'll start with the comment you made earlier about tailwinds. I'm of the mind that there's never been a more exciting time. I'm 56 years old. I got 4 kids. One just graduated from University of Illinois. I've been to over nearly 1,000 college universities all over the world. There has never been a better moment to be in post-secondary education. Never been. All the different ways that we can serve the modern learner, all the different ways that we can help the modern learner become more competitive in the workforce. So there's just never been a more rich and interesting time to be a part of the higher education community with the right mindset. So you mentioned this notion, the number of mergers and acquisitions that are going on in higher education, not just obviously in the commercial world, but within the higher education institutional community itself. I'm of the mind it's great. It should happen faster. It should have been happening faster, and there's just tremendous opportunity there. And I'm certainly not the first one. Ryan Craig, who I think is outstanding. We need more leaders who think like commercial leaders in higher education. Now, we all recognize that there's often this tension between the academy, right, getting an education for education's sake, and helping learners, the modern learner, get jobs, which for the most part, that's why they go to college, is to get a job. So the M&A activity within the institutions themselves, it needs to go faster. And that should be exciting to that level of change should be really exciting to the leaders within an institution, the faculty within an institution, and the students themselves, because that change will help our higher education systems become more competitive. We'll be able to introduce more interesting course offerings in a more agile environment. So it really is an exciting time to be a part of the community, and I'm optimistic that we'll see more activity and not less.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tried and true optimist, so I do like want to acknowledge it's like, yeah, I think there is so much potential still and opportunities for, like you said, just really impacting people's lives, changing their lives, and I mean, I definitely reflect and felt that impact as well of where just like I found myself in my leadership style and my career choice in higher education through going to college and getting involved and wanting to kind of give back and knowing I always wanted to work in education but then sort of being like, oh no, like this is it, this is how I want to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think that there now is kind of that clear mandate where like these are venerable institutions, this sort of trend lines now where it's like, okay, sure, you've been around for a very long time and you'll continue to be around, but you're going to look different, and it's now kind of like a very clear mandate for institutions to innovate and change and kind of keep up versus just sort of resting on your laurels. We've built it, so they will come and all of that. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's about time, and it's a good thing, that they're, these institutions are needing to, make these improvements to stay competitive. Like you said, I think is just going to be kind of one of the taglines for this episode.
This notion of the clear mandate, you're right. The clear mandate comes from the consumer. And the clear mandate from the consumer is saying, hey, listen, I'm actually willing to pay. I'm actually willing to go into great debt, but that's another issue. I don't think that we'll get into a second. I don't think there's any reason to have college debt, but we're willing to pay. But you've got to help me be more competitive in the marketplace, the employment marketplace, and you've got to show me a great return on my investment for engaging in you. We just need to move a lot faster in higher education, and we need more commercial leadership within colleges and universities. An example would be if I were a college president, I would pay my chief marketing officer at certain schools like I pay my football coach, because modern marketing is so essential for college universities, and many just don't have it. And in many ways, they're just not willing to pay for it, because in the end, you do get what you pay for. I'm not talking about paying for Google ads and things like that, which is important. I'm talking about paying for talent. Another thing that I would, let's take this notion of employment. Many college universities will tell you that about 6 months after graduation, 94, 95, 96% of our students have a job 6 months afterwards, which is true. Doesn't matter what that job is. But when you unpack that, it's often not always a great job. But I would have a chancellor level employment czar of some kind at nearly every college university and pay them again, like I might pay a university or college president or a football coach, because that's why those, in many cases, most cases, why those students are there. How do we, while they're at school, starting freshman year, how do we help them be more competitive from the jump, if you will, from moment one all the way through? That's the kind of commercial. I'm not saying those are the answers, but that's what I would do, having been around, like I said, nearly 1,000 college universities over the past 35 years, spoken with hundreds and hundreds of senior administrators, thousands upon thousands of faculty members and students. Those are the two of the things that I would attack hard, and that is within the power of a college or university president to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of like our usual like call to action at the end. I feel like that's a good sort of like cue, because I think like sort of cueing people into the idea of, to me, sort of the takeaway is like your budget is where you live out your values. That idea of like where you're putting that money and investing resources, which like for a lot of institutions are just going to get increasingly limited. If they are like tuition driven and they're experiencing enrollment declines, it's like, okay, like where are we gonna put money into to sort of like try to press on the gas here a little bit, like try to get things moving and growing, and maybe figure out what is and isn't working. But like you need really good strategies around talent retention and recruitment and all that. And I like that I'm seeing people in higher ed talking that way about like, like you want good people and good like talent recruitment and engagement and retention in higher education, because this is really important work. And I think it can be really fulfilling. And, uh, there's a lot to kind of the value proposition of working in higher education, but often, yeah, they a lot of colleges and institutions like will lose people because they're overworked and underpaid and different things like that. But
Right.
I think also, to your point, like the idea of like, for one, like bringing in people with kind of the right mindset to an institution, but then like, I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm trying to kind of like I guess set myself up for kind of segueing to my next question, but like recognizing where and how best to then work with like partners as a college, like who are we going to bring in, how are we going to work with them to sort of help augment our work. Like I've just been seeing as sort of a byproduct of the last 2 years, where there's kind of like acknowledgement of, it's like, yeah, I mean, we can do a lot in-house as a college. Like we do have a lot of, assets and resources and everything, but like we need help. Like we need, good partnerships to help kind of, sustain and stay competitive and all that. So I think, that's just an interesting byproduct that I
Well,
would.
here's something you said that is really powerful, and that is the budget is where you live out your values. So let's take continuing education and workforce development. For many, if not most, potentially all college universities, if they have a continuing education workforce development program, it's often the only part of a college university that is actually growing. So, as you know, in the commercial world, when we see the growth that is happening within the continuing ed workforce development programs of college universities, we would pour, back to your point about your budget is where you live out your values, we would pour resources and energy and love into continuing ed and workforce development, because it's making a big difference for the college university because they have a budget too. And more importantly, it's making a massive difference for the lifelong learners. I'll give you an example. My son just graduated from University of Illinois, great school, straight A student, but he doesn't want to be a historian, doesn't want to be a teacher. What he wants to do is get into sustainable farming. So he took a couple of agriculture courses. So what's my point? So if they had an outstanding CMO, they may have an outstanding CMO at the University of Illinois, but they've never marketed their continuing education or workforce development courses to my son. And they have an outstanding School of Continuing Education, like most great colleges and universities do. So, what a missed opportunity to introduce their continuing ed and workforce development programs to, in this case, my son, but all the other great students at that college and universities. And that's how you capture that mind share for life. So, Harrison had a good experience at the University of Illinois, but they'll ask him for $50 in 3 years. But they didn't, they missed a massive opportunity to energize Harrison and have him take continuing education courses from their professional development programs and then do it for life. Be engaged with the University of Illinois as a metaphor for life. So many of those opportunities are just being missed. Yes, when I talk to CE professionals or even senior administrators on the degree side of the house, they would say, well, there's a separation between the degree and the CE and all these silos and all that stuff. You just got to take it down, and a great commercial leadership would raise up continuing ed and workforce development. And if you don't have a continuing ed and workforce development program at your college university, you should do it right now. So one of the things that Modern Campus does is we provide a Netflix or Amazon-like experience for the schools of continuing education, workforce development. We have a SaaS-based software that does it beautifully. So that's in part what Modern Campus helps to do, but it's really about this, to your earlier point about trends. One of the greatest trends in higher education is what's happening outside of the degree side of a college university.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, we've spoken to folks on the podcast a few times about that space. I mean, it's so important, like you said, just for the strategy, I think, for institutions moving forward of, growing the offerings and figuring out how are you going to connect with, your alumni of all ages. I think sometimes it's either they're doing no marketing or little marketing just to folks that they think, maybe if they're going to further down their career would find value in what they have. But, I think it is just going to be a huge part of the growth strategy and, to engage, alumni, but also just like a whole community, like how can we kind of present ourselves to folks who, are looking for something different. But, so, all this stuff about, that we've talked about in terms of, partnering with external partners for sort of supplementing and augmenting the work and, all the things that kind of need to be done, I think, for, colleges and universities to stay ahead. You all at Modern Campus have made some acquisitions that I've noticed that's pretty noteworthy. One of which is a company called Presence that I've known about for a very long time. I've loved their work, so it's really cool to see them kind of joining your team and sort of being supported in that way. But so with all that we've talked about, like, how do you see sort of like the way that you're trying to follow the trend lines or figure out like how you can best work with institutions? I just feel like it's been very newsworthy, everything that you're doing to sort of like, build your kind of portfolio and everything. Just how do you see what you're doing kind of factoring into your strategy moving forward?
Thank you for that. So let's take Presence. Everything that we're doing, as we continue to build upon the platforms that we've acquired or platforms that we've acquired or will acquire, are, to your point, following the specific needs and the trends of college, universities, and students. Let's take Presence. So Presence is a co-curricular student engagement platform. Many college universities have hundreds of clubs and other sororities. So Presence provides an easy way, a very personalized way for a student to find the right fit, the right place for them at a college university. So in the commercial world, one of the things that a good company will do is the faster that we can help new employees, prospective and new employees, get engaged and make friends and find a fit, the more likely we are to retain them. So likewise, if a prospective student finds the right group for them, they're going to develop the social and emotional skills that they need to be successful in life, and they're far more likely to stay at that college, university, graduate, feel fantastic about their chosen institution, and then be an active alumni member for life and can contribute back whether through either financially or even more importantly through mentorship and creating jobs for graduates. So that's really why we acquired Presence. There's another business that we acquired called Signalvine. It's a two-way text messaging platform. We all know that email is kind of like the new BlackBerry. Very few people read their email religiously. Even those of us in the commercial world. I'm 56 years old. Most of it's all the work's done on Slack and text. And I have teenagers, and they read all of the text, but they don't read the emails. So we have this two-way text messaging platform that we've acquired that is the connective tissue across the entire platform. And it's a way for college and universities, for example, to help students not only inform them through text, but help them understand what student success programs are available at that college university. For example, I was just talking to the system president, met with the system president of Miami-Dade, and they use our text messaging platform every day to remind students who go through, in their case, one of their more difficult programs is English. So they remind students every single day through their texting platform all the wonderful resources that are available to them for around their English program. So long answer to your questions, but we are acquiring everything that we are doing follows the trend lines, follows the needs, and follows the pain points, most importantly, that college universities are facing and the modern learner is facing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just great to hear how you're kind of utilizing all these different things, because I think like what's on my mind, and I think you're already kind of way ahead of it, like with building up sort of this these different tools and everything, is that with the enrollment declines, like retention is going to be that much more important, and there's a lot to that. Like I think some institutions are maybe like, yeah, we have like a bunch of great clubs and all these opportunities for students to do stuff, but it's like, yeah, but I mean, if you're just sort of like setting them adrift and just sort of expecting them to like, navigate, it's like some will figure it out, but then there'll be others that sort of just are, sort of wayward and not really sure where they fit in. And, like you said, it's like, they just don't feel like they have that community around them to be supportive, both socially and academically and everything. Then, they may just sort of transfer somewhere else or drop out entirely, or, just at least like not having a positive experience and not having that kind of affinity for, that institution and everything. But yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes into student success, like the tools that are used, and just sort of the operating philosophies to nudge and check in and just be as accessible as possible to students, to give them what they need, when they need it, how they need it, and all that. So
It,
that's
it,
really great.
it's very powerful what you just said, that about students just finding their way through a college university. The reality is most don't. They enroll in a community college or, in many cases, a state school. And one of the reasons they dropped out is because it wasn't financial necessarily, is they just didn't have the word that you just used, the experience. They weren't able to get engaged. They didn't find their friends. I'll give you an example. So I have four kids. I mentioned one just graduated from the University of Illinois. I have another at the Berklee College of Music. Then my third child is at Illinois State. He's got parents who are from the higher education community. I've spent 35 years in the community. I am networked. I can help him find his way around. But in many cases, he's just lost. And he's doing well at school, but if he didn't have someone in his ear, he had the gift of having parents who come from higher education in his ear every day, helping him find his place. That's just a one-off. But the vast majority of students, they don't find their way, and there's a reason why there's nearly 40 million adult learners in the United States and Canada who have some or a lot of education, no degree, and the debt to prove it without the degree is because in many cases they didn't find that connection at a college university. That's why tools like Presence are just so darn important, and this text messaging platform to help them find their way is just really important.
Absolutely. And so you'd already mentioned before, and I think this is just sort of like an interesting thing to me, with like, you're gonna building your suite of tools yourself at Modern Campus through like acquisitions and everything. But we're seeing so much of this just happening in higher ed in general, with colleges and universities joining forces and working together, either just in like, strategic partnerships, or sort of more straightforward, earnest mergers and acquisitions and everything. But you were like saying, I think, was just like a very enthusiastic sort of support that, like, that this is a good thing. So I think just like expanding on that of just sort of like what you make of this wave of mergers and acquisitions right now across colleges and sort of like, what that means for the field.
I think it's a good thing. I've heard someone said once, people, governments, relationships, institutions only change when they're on the precipice. So it is clear that for many colleges and universities, they're on the precipice. So when you're on the precipice, you get open to ideas real fast, and typically that's where the innovation happens. And in the end, the consumer wins. So I couldn't be more excited about what's happening with some of the mergers and acquisitions, but it's beyond that. There are great innovations. For example, you have the Indiana Community College system, for example, talking to Purdue Global about how they share students, how they share courses, how they adapt together. And so more and more, we're seeing this in some ways unprecedented partnership between community colleges and their local four-year institutions without this notion of, well, if I partner with XYZ community college, what kind of impact will it have on my brand? Those are natural questions. But if you just take the student in mind and what's the right thing for the student, ultimately all tides rise and your brand will be fine. So there has to be more of it, and it has to happen faster. And then ultimately the consumer wins.
Yeah, and I think that that is just the crux of it is that it's what needs to be happening right now for the good of the students. Because I think like, you know, if there's just like you're not seeing as many just like colleges straight up close. Like I think you're seeing a few of those, but then like, the mergers and everything and the partnerships does sort of like just expand, you know, or at least just continue the reach of colleges and has them just work, I think, more smartly together. And education, I think, generally just is such a collaborative space to where like I think we need to get away from the purely kind of like, if I win that means you lose kind of thing. Like if it is just like, hey, we're a partnership, like if you kind of pick up students and they study at your school, as a community college student for a few years, and we have a really clear seamless transfer agreement and those sort of things, like works for you, works for us, works for the student, like everybody wins. So like just having that more cohesive net for students to get the education they need and have it be accessible to them, be a successful environment for them to study and everything. It is just a good thing. And I think like does sort of like emphasize like sort of, kind of the competitiveness, like you said, like if an institution is not sort of in the place where they need or want to be, then, going through a merger or acquisition can be something that's really positive so that they aren't just closing, they aren't just sort of like shutting doors, and then there are sort of fewer seats uh, for students to study at and everything. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely complex. It's obviously just kind of a new thing, I'm sure, for so many people in higher ed. But I think, yeah, taking the right sort of like optimistic point of view with everything, I think is the right way, because I think there is a lot of potential there, and just doing it the right way, doing it intentionally does end up, I think, creating a better higher ed ecosystem for everybody.
No question about that. And back to your original, which I love, budget is where you live out your values. And another example, you mentioned the transfer student. So if I were today a college university president, without question, I would elevate, I would find a world class CMO done. Then I'd promote someone to a chancellor level to drive employment across our college university. Then I would have also promote, I'm sure many college universities already have that, but I would pay this person like my football coach. And that would be, I'm not using the right words here, a provost or a chancellor of transfer students, because they're so darned important. So if a student like my son, Liam, he went to Harper Community College, did well, 3.5 grade point average, and guess how valuable that student is, Liam is, to Illinois State, because he's proven that he can do college level work. So I would go after and hire just a world class CMO, an incredible employment chancellor, and I would rise to the level of a chancellor level, someone driving and going after those transfer students. And I would make it so easy to transfer to my college university. It wouldn't be for qualified students, it wouldn't even be funny.
Yeah, I think those are very smart recommendations, and it is like, in so many ways with a lot of those things are like, and I think mostly the transfer policies where like schools may kind of like talk a big game, but like, when it gets right down to it, it's like, how does a student actually transfer? How do their credits come through? Like, how easy is that? Like where I think they're going to, you know, do a lot of the things that make it sort of, look like they are very welcoming, and I'm sure they are to transfer students, but like, when it comes right down to it, like it's about like how many credits am I going to carry over, and like, what are your program offerings, and just how it sort of almost like the nuts and bolts of it works of going from one institution to the next. So I think, yeah, that idea of saying like, get somebody like at a high level that is, empowered to, give that the time and attention and resources it needs. But yeah.
Empowered to give them the Nordstrom experience, right? I love shopping in Nordstrom. Empowered to treat that transfer student like you would an elite retail store, right? Make it evaluate every part along that journey and make it wonderful, make it seamless, make it easy. And any college or university president, they have the power to do that. There are certain things that are more complicated, as we know, but those things that I just mentioned, any college university president can do.
Very good recommendations. And, we're getting towards the end here. We do also like to give the platform for other recommendations of resources that you might want folks to check out, maybe on any of the things that we've been kind of talking about here, or just sort of broadly, things that are kind of grabbing your attention. So yeah, stuff that we could include in the show notes.
Sure. Ryan Craig is pretty famous within the edtech community. He's an investor, venture capitalist. He's written a few books, Education Disrupted, things like that. So look up Ryan Craig. For those who are investors, who want to become even smarter investors, he does a really terrific job. And for those leaders within, whether they're within the academic institutions or commercial leaders like me, read his stuff. It's really good. I also like Brandon Bastide. I think he's been on your podcast. I read his LinkedIn stuff nearly every day. Brandon Bastide is quite good. And we have something called The Evolution. Amrit Aliwala is our editor-in-chief, and it's just a fantastic publication. So those are a few places to go ahead and dive into for those who are interested.
Yeah, and I'll clarify, just as like a manifestation kind of thing, I have not had Brandon on the podcast yet, but if you or anybody else could help make that happen, that would be incredible. Because I do feel, yeah, he's like one of those really great people who is like, okay, you just get it. Like you just have like the right point of view and just like some very good perspectives and commentary and everything going on. So it's like, whenever I see people like that, it's just like, yeah, I've heard them speak on other podcasts and everything, and it's just like, yeah, I'd love to just have a little jam session for a bit and talk about everything.
We'll make that happen. That's easy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, then we will wrap up there as we always do with kind of giving you the floor. You've had some incredible perspectives and recommendations and thoughts already, but we do just like to kind of tie everything up with a nice little bow here with a final thought or call to action for the audience that you want to give on this topic to end the episode.
It's always just about great jobs and learning for life. So when we think about post-secondary education, yes, there is learning for learning, and for learning's sake, it all adds up. It all counts. It's all important, but it is about getting students great jobs, real jobs, and preparing them for those jobs. That is our job. So listen, I really enjoyed the time with you, Dustin, and I will connect you to Brandon.
That is great. I appreciate that. But yeah, just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and Modern Campus and everything you mentioned in the show notes for this episode. But yeah, it's just great to talk with you and to be connected with you. So just thank you so much for your time.
It was a lot of fun, Dustin. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.